They married off the frail alien woman to a human man, but now she's the strongest warrior in the galaxy. Daniel had been on Kepler 442b for 8 months when the marriage broker's message arrived, and his first thought was that someone was playing an extremely elaborate prank. The second thought, occurring roughly 3 seconds after he'd spat recycled coffee across his console, was that the colonial administration's idea of filling personnel gaps had finally jumped the shark into complete insanity. "A what?" he'd asked the flickering hologram of Administrator Chen, who had the decency to look mildly embarrassed. "A cultural exchange marriage," Chen repeated, as though saying it slower would make it less absurd. "The Kalayan family is looking to establish stronger human-alien relations, and you're our only unmarried colonist in the appropriate age range who hasn't explicitly threatened violence over the suggestion." "That's because everyone else got the suggestion first," Daniel pointed out. "I'm last pick in the galaxy's worst dating pool. Think of it as an opportunity. I'm thinking of it as several violations of my employment contract." But Chen had that look, the one administrators got when they were about to explain why something terrible was actually in everyone's best interest. The Kalayans were old money in galactic terms, influential enough that keeping them happy meant continued mining rights, trade agreements, and the kind of political protection that kept raiders from treating frontier colonies like personal supply depots. One marriage, one symbolic gesture, practically painless. Daniel had asked what the bride thought about being a symbolic gesture. Chen's hologram had flickered uncomfortably and changed the subject. The transport arrived on a Tuesday, which felt cosmically unfair. Tuesdays were supposed to be boring. Daniel stood in the landing bay watching the sleek Kalayan ship settle onto the pads with the kind of grace that made their battered mining vessels look like flying scrap heaps. His dress uniform, if the cleanest jumpsuit he owned counted as formal wear, felt too tight across the shoulders. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," offered Maria from processing, who'd come to watch the spectacle with undisguised glee. "I'm about to marry a complete stranger from a species I know almost nothing about because someone in administration thought it would be good for relations. So yes, firing squad. Got it." The ship's boarding ramp extended with a hydraulic hiss that sounded expensive. 2 Kalayan officials emerged first, their long ears, the only visible marker of their alien heritage, pressed back in what Daniel's hasty cultural research suggested was either displeasure or deep concentration. Hard to tell. The guide had been written by someone who clearly never actually met a Kalayan. Then she appeared, and Daniel's prepared greeting died somewhere in his throat. She was small. That was his first coherent thought. The second was that she moved like someone navigating a ship in a storm, each step careful and measured, one hand trailing along the ramp's support rail. Her skin was pale enough that the landing bay's harsh lights seemed to pass through it, and those distinctive ears hung low, almost drooping. When she reached the bottom of the ramp, she swayed. Daniel moved without thinking, crossing the distance between them in seconds. He caught her elbow just as her knees buckled, felt how fragile the joint seemed under his fingers. "I'm fine," she said immediately, her voice soft but carrying an edge of practiced defensiveness. "Just the gravity adjustment." Kepler 442b had lower gravity than Earth. Daniel didn't want to think about what her homeworld must be like if this was difficult. One of the officials, male, wearing enough medals to stock a military surplus store, cleared his throat with obvious impatience. "This is Naomi. The contracts have been transmitted to your administration. We trust everything is in order for the ceremony." There was something in his tone that made Daniel's jaw tighten, the way someone might discuss furniture delivery. He looked down at Naomi, who was carefully not meeting anyone's eyes, her entire body rigid with tension. "Welcome to Kepler 442b, Daniel said, pitching his voice gentle. "Sorry about the gravity, and the dust, and probably everything else you're going to experience here." She glanced up then, surprise flickering across her face. Her eyes were gold, actual metallic gold, like someone had poured sunset into her irises. "You apologize strangely," she observed. "I do everything strangely. It's kind of my thing." The corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. The official coughed again. "The ceremony?" "Right," Daniel said. The legally binding contract disguised as a wedding. Let's get that over with. You're really not selling this, Maria muttered from her position by the processing desk. Would you want to be sold on it? Fair point. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took place in the landing bay because apparently nobody had thought to prepare anything more formal. An officiator droid rattled through the contract terms, property rights, residency status, dissolution clauses that made divorce sound like breaking a lease, while Naomi swayed beside him and her family's representatives checked their chronometers with increasing obviousness. The quarters Daniel called home were designed for one person who didn't mind feeling like they lived in a particularly spacious coffin. With two people, it became an exercise in careful choreography. He'd spent the previous night rearranging furniture with increasing desperation, finally admitting that no amount of feng shui would make the space less claustrophobic. Naomi stood in the doorway for a long moment after he'd carried her single bag inside. Her family's ship had departed approximately 40 seconds after the contract was signed, which had to be some kind of record for ceremonial abandonment. Daniel had watched the engines flare against Kepler, 442b's perpetual rust-colored sky, and felt a cold fury settle in his chest. The bed's yours, he said, gesturing at the sleeping alcove. I can take the couch. It's not as terrible as it looks. It looks fairly terrible, Naomi observed quietly. Okay, it's exactly as terrible as it looks. But I've slept in worse. She moved into the room with that same careful precision, trailing one hand along the wall, as though mapping the space by touch. When she reached the viewport overlooking the mining operations, she stopped. The view was objectively awful. Processing plants, equipment yards, the jagged mountains that held the iridium deposits they were all here to extract. But she stared at it like she was seeing something else entirely. I don't expect anything, she said finally, still facing the window. From this arrangement, I know what I am to them, what I probably am to you. Daniel had been trying to figure out the protein synthesizer's settings and nearly dropped the beverage container. What you are is someone who just got dragged across 3 star systems to marry a stranger. That's not exactly a dream scenario for either of us. I'm a liability. Her voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. My condition makes me weak. I can't work in standard gravity. I require expensive medical treatments my family decided were no longer worth the investment. Marrying me off to a frontier colony was simply the most efficient solution to their problem. The synthesizer beeped, announcing it had successfully created something that was technically drinkable. Daniel grabbed both containers and crossed to stand beside her at the viewport. Here's what I think about efficiency, he said, offering her one. It's vastly overrated. The most efficient solution to most problems is usually the cruelest one. She took the container, examining the contents with obvious suspicion. What is this? The machine claims it's tea. I've learned not to argue with it. Naomi took a careful sip, her expression cycling through several emotions before settling on resigned acceptance. It tastes like tea was explained to someone who'd never experienced flavor. Welcome to frontier cuisine. Everything tastes like the concept of food. That earned him a startled laugh, quickly suppressed but genuine. She looked at him directly for the first time since entering the quarters, those gold eyes searching his face for something. You really are strange for a human. So I've been told. Usually right before someone asks me to stop doing whatever I'm doing. What are you doing? Right now, trying to figure out if this marriage thing means I'm supposed to make awkward small talk or just let you rest. The cultural database wasn't exactly helpful on the protocol. Naomi's ears twitched, a quick involuntary movement that Daniel filed away as potentially significant. The protocol, she said slowly, is that you've acquired a dependent who will try not to inconvenience you too much before her health inevitably declines further. That's what the contract stipulates. Everything else is optional. The contract can go jump out an airlock, Daniel said. You're a person, not a piece of equipment. And for what it's worth, I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to be helping you, not the other way around. She was quiet for a long moment, taking another reluctant sip of the synthesized tea. Outside, the second shift was changing over, miners trudging toward the processing center in their environmental suits. The mountains beyond were turning deep purple as Kepler 442b's sun began its long descent. I apologize, Naomi said finally. For what? For existing, for breathing your air, For taking up space in your home. Daniel felt something snap in his chest. Stop! She flinched, ears flattening completely. No, I'm sorry, he said quickly, forcing his voice calmer. I didn't mean to bark at you, but seriously, stop apologizing for being alive. You didn't ask for any of this. Neither did I. But we're here now, and you're allowed to exist without constantly justifying it. Naomi stared at him like he'd started speaking in quantum equations. That's not how it works. Maybe it should be. You can't just decide that. Watch me. New rule. No apologizing for basic biological functions, breathing, existing, occupying physical space, all exempt from apology requirements. That's ridiculous. Probably, Daniel admitted. Add it to my list of character flaws. Right below, argues with beverage synthesizers, and above, can't fold fitted sheets. The corner of her mouth twitched again, stronger this time. You have a list? It's extensive. I've been adding to it for years. How extensive? Let's just say it's longer than the marriage contract and significantly more honest. This time she actually smiled, brief but unmistakable. It transformed her entire face, chasing away some of the exhaustion and pain that seemed to live in her bones. I think, she said carefully, that I might have been assigned to the galaxy's strangest human. Assigned makes it sound so official, like I came with an instruction manual. Did you? Lost it years ago. Now I just improvise and hope for the best. 3 months into the arrangement that nobody was calling a marriage, Daniel came home to find Naomi attempting to reach a storage compartment approximately half a meter above her maximum stretch. She was standing on a chair that wobbled alarmingly with each movement, one hand braced against the wall, while the other groped blindly for whatever she'd decided was worth risking her neck to retrieve. Need help? Daniel asked from the doorway. Naomi startled, the chair tipped, and Daniel crossed the room in time to catch her before gravity completed its inevitable work. She weighed almost nothing, all sharp angles and fragile bones under his hands. I had it, she said, glaring at the offending compartment. You had a concussion in your immediate future, Daniel corrected, setting her carefully on solid ground. What were you after? Your books, the actual paper ones you keep hidden like contraband. He blinked. Those are just old Earth novels. Nothing exciting. They're physical objects that aren't mining equipment or medical supplies. On this colony, that makes them exotic. Daniel retrieved the small collection. Dog-eared paperbacks he'd smuggled past weight restrictions, their spines cracked from repeated reading. Fair warning, most of these are terrible. There's a reason they were in the discount bin. Naomi took them with the reverence someone might show ancient artifacts, running her fingers over the covers. Her hands still shook slightly, but less than they had 3 months ago. The tremor that had made holding utensils an exercise in frustration was gradually subsiding into something manageable. I've been reading your database entries, she said, settling onto the couch that had become her default territory. About Earth. Your history is violent and illogical, and somehow you kept not destroying yourselves. We came close a few times. Still might, actually. The jury's out. My people's history is all about efficiency and optimization. We spent 3,000 years perfecting ourselves. She opened one of the books at random, scanning the pages. But somewhere in all that perfection, we forgot that imperfect things can still be valuable. Daniel sat beside her, careful to leave space. They'd developed an unspoken geography over the past weeks, territories and boundaries that shifted based on her energy levels and his work schedule. Is that what they told you? That you weren't valuable? They didn't have to tell me. I was the daughter who couldn't walk without assistance, who needed gravity compensation just to function, who cost more in medical care than I could ever contribute to the family status. The math was simple. Math is overrated, Daniel said. Some of the best things in life make absolutely no economic sense. Like marrying a sick alien woman to improve trade relations. Like keeping old books when digital files weigh nothing. Like watching sunsets on a planet that's mostly rust and regret. Like, he stopped, suddenly aware he was veering into territory they'd been carefully avoiding. Naomi looked up from the book, one eyebrow raised. Her ears had started doing this thing, where they perked up slightly when she was curious. Like a tell she didn't know she had. Like what? Like teaching someone to appreciate frontier cuisine. he finished lamely. You mean the synthesizer's continued crimes against food? Exactly. Though I maintain that yesterday's protein loaf had almost achieved the texture of actual bread. It had achieved the texture of construction insulation, Naomi said. I checked the material specifications to be sure. Daniel laughed, surprised and delighted. 3 months ago, she'd barely spoken. Now she was making jokes at his expense, and it felt like progress. You've been reading construction manuals? I've been reading everything. There's not much else to do when your wife by contract is at work and you're too weak to leave the quarters most days. The casual way she said wife made something flip in Daniel's chest. They'd been avoiding labels, calling each other roommate, or that person the administration stuck me with, when other colonists asked. Hearing her claim the term, even sarcastically, felt significant. Speaking of which, he said, standing before his brain could fully process the implications. I wanted to show you something, if you're feeling up to it. Naomi closed the book, studying him with those unsettling gold eyes. Show me what? The gym. And I use that term extremely loosely. You have a gym? The colony has a room with some weights in it. Whether that constitutes a gym is a matter of philosophical debate. She stood slowly, testing her balance. The low gravity helped. Kepler 442b's pull was roughly 70% of Earth standard, which meant she could move here in ways that would have been impossible on her homeworld. Why would I want to see a gym? Because you've been getting stronger, Daniel said. I've noticed. The tremors are better. You're not as tired in the evenings, and you just climbed on a chair to commit larceny against my book collection. That's not strength. That's desperation and boredom. Maybe. Or maybe your condition isn't the permanent sentence your family treated it as. Maybe in lower gravity, with proper nutrition and some physical therapy, you could actually improve. Naomi was quiet for a long moment, something complicated crossing her face. My people tried everything. Genetic therapy, neural stimulation, pharmaceutical cocktails that cost more than most colonists make in a year. Nothing worked. Did they try just letting you move in an environment that didn't fight you every second? That's not how medicine works. Good thing I'm not a doctor then. I'm just a guy with access to some questionable gym equipment and a theory that your family gave up too early because fixing you was expensive and inconvenient. She stared at him, ears flat against her skull, and what he'd learned meant she was either angry or fighting tears. You can't know that. You're right, I can't. But what's the worst that happens? You try some exercises and nothing changes? At least then you'll know. The worst that happens, Naomi said quietly, is that I start hoping again. Hope is expensive when you've spent your whole life learning it's a waste of resources. Daniel held out his hand, palm up, an offer rather than a demand. Then maybe it's time for some wasteful spending. The gym was exactly as pathetic as Daniel had promised. Someone had cleared out a storage room adjacent to the mining operations and filled it with equipment that looked like it had survived at least 3 different colonial disasters. The gravity plating flickered occasionally, creating momentary pockets where weights floated like confused metal butterflies before crashing back down. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen, Naomi observed, watching a dumbbell drift past her head. That's why we make everyone sign a waiver that's longer than most religious texts, Daniel said, guiding her past the malfunctioning section. The good news is nobody actually reads it, so we maintain plausible deniability. The administration knows about this. The administration pretends not to know about this. There's a difference. Naomi ran her hand along a bench press that had been welded back together so many times it looked more like modern art than exercise equipment. How has nobody died? Oh, people have definitely been injured. Rodrigo broke his foot last month when the Smith machine achieved sentience and attacked him. Equipment can't achieve sentience. Tell that to Rodrigo's foot. It's still not speaking to him. She laughed, the sound echoing in the cramped space. Over the past month, her laugh had become less rare, less startled. Daniel had started collecting them like other people collected data, cataloging what made her genuinely amused versus what prompted polite acknowledgement of his terrible jokes. So where do we start? Naomi asked, and Daniel heard the thread of nervousness under the casual question. Slow, he said. We start very, very slow. The goal isn't to turn you into a powerlifter in a week. It's just to see what happens when you move intentionally in an environment that isn't actively trying to crush you. They started with basic movements. Naomi's neuromuscular condition meant her brain struggled to send consistent signals to her muscles, hence the tremors, the weakness, the feeling that her body was a machine with faulty wiring. But in Kepler 442b's lower gravity, with Daniel spotting her carefully, she began to experiment. Try lifting your arm, he suggested, just straight out to the side. She did slowly. Her hand shook, her shoulder trembled with effort, but the arm rose, held, stayed parallel to the floor for 5 full seconds before fatigue dragged it down. Again, Daniel said. I just did it. And now you're going to do it again. That's how this works. This is deeply boring, Naomi complained, but she raised her arm again. 7 seconds this time. They worked for 20 minutes before her energy flagged completely. Daniel had learned to read the signs, the way her ears drooped, how her breathing shifted from controlled to struggling, the slight gray tinge that crept into her pale skin when she was pushing too hard. Enough for today, he said, handing her a water container. Naomi took it gratefully, her hands shaking badly enough that water sloshed over the rim. I lifted my arm 14 times. Truly, I am becoming an unstoppable warrior. Hey, 2 weeks ago, you couldn't lift it twice without your muscles spasming. That's progress. At this rate, I'll be able to do a push-up by the time I'm 300. Your people live that long? Only the ones who aren't defective, she said, then seemed to catch herself. Sorry, old habit. Daniel sat beside her on the floor, their backs against the wall. The gym's other occupants, 3 miners and a shuttle pilot, were carefully pretending not to watch the fragile alien woman who'd started showing up. You keep using that word, defective. It's accurate. My neural pathways don't fire correctly. I was born broken. You were born different. There's a distinction. Not in Chilean society. We optimized ourselves for millennia, genetic screening, embryonic modification, the whole suite of technologies. Having a child with a neurological disorder is like building a spacecraft and forgetting to install the navigation system. It's not supposed to happen. But it did happen, Daniel pointed out. You happened, and maybe instead of trying to fix you according to their standards, someone should have asked what you needed to thrive on your own terms. Naomi was quiet, staring at her trembling hands. That's a very human way of thinking. Is it? We don't believe in accommodation. We believe in perfection. How's that working out for you? She shot him a look that was equal parts annoyed and amused. I'm sitting in a death-trap gym on a frontier mining colony, married to a human who argues with kitchen appliances. You tell me. Sounds like you escaped, honestly. Or got discarded. Can it be both? Naomi considered this, taking another careful sip of water. Across the gym, someone dropped a weight, and the gravity plating sparked ominously. Do you actually think this will help? The exercise? I think it can't hurt to try. Your condition isn't degenerative, right? It's stable? Stable in the sense that I've always been equally useless. Yes. Stop that, Daniel said automatically. New rule. No calling yourself useless. You have a lot of rules for someone who claims to hate efficiency. I'm efficiently implementing chaos. It's different. She smiled despite herself, and Daniel felt absurdly proud. Fine. My condition is stable. The neural pathways don't degrade. They just don't work properly. I've had every specialist in Chilean space examine me. The consensus was that I would never improve beyond minimal function. And how many of those specialists tested you in low gravity? Naomi opened her mouth, then closed it. None. Our worlds are all high gravity. It's part of our evolutionary adaptation. So maybe, Daniel said carefully, just maybe your people were solving the wrong problem. They were trying to fix you to match their environment instead of finding an environment that matched you. The emergency klaxon started wailing at 0400 hours, which meant Daniel was deeply asleep and dreaming about something that definitely wasn't his life when reality came crashing back in the form of systematic alarm protocols. He rolled out of bed, muscle memory from mining accidents taking over, and nearly collided with Naomi in the darkness. What's happening? She asked, already pulling on clothes despite the tremor in her hands. Either a drill or something catastrophically bad, Daniel said, checking his comm unit. The message scrolling across the screen made his stomach drop. It's not a drill. The colony's main hub was chaos orchestrated by people who'd trained for this scenario, but never actually believed it would happen. Administrator Chen stood at the central display, her face illuminated by tactical readouts that showed 3 Kryn Imperium warships in high orbit. They're demanding we evacuate within 72 hours, Chen announced to the assembled colonists. The Kryn are claiming this system falls under their territorial expansion rights, according to some treaty from 200 years ago that nobody's ever heard of. That's insane, someone shouted. We have colonial defense agreements, which the Kryn apparently don't care about, Chen said tiredly. They've given us 3 days to pack up and leave, or they'll remove us forcibly. Daniel felt Naomi's hand find his in the crowd. Her fingers were ice cold but steady. Around them, people were already arguing, some wanting to fight, others pointing out that fighting 3 warships with mining equipment was suicide, everyone talking over each other in rising panic. We're not leaving, Naomi said quietly, but her voice cut through the noise somehow. The crowd went silent. Administrator Chen blinked at her. I'm sorry, what? We're not leaving, Naomi repeated louder now. She stepped forward and Daniel watched something shift in her posture. 6 months of training had changed her in ways that went beyond physical strength. She moved with purpose now, even when exhausted. This is our home. We defend it. With what army? Someone called out. We're miners, not soldiers. Then we learn, Naomi said simply. We have 3 days. I can teach you enough to make a difference. You? The skepticism in the question was barely veiled. No offense, but you're? Kalayan, Naomi finished. My people were warriors before we were scientists. Before we optimized ourselves into complacency, we spent millennia perfecting combat. I know things that most of the galaxy has forgotten. Chen looked between Naomi and the tactical display showing 3 hostile warships. You're talking about turning a bunch of miners into a fighting force in 72 hours. I'm talking about making them dangerous enough that the Kryn decide easier targets exist, Naomi corrected. We don't have to win. We just have to make victory cost more than it's worth. Daniel squeezed her hand. You sure about this? She looked at him with those gold eyes that had been frightened and uncertain 6 months ago. Now they were calculating, measuring angles and probabilities. You told me I was tough for traveling 3-star systems while sick. These people built a home on a planet that actively hates them and did it anyway. That makes them tougher than most military units I've read about. Reading about military units and leading one are different things, Chen pointed out. Good thing I'm not leading, Naomi said. I'm just teaching. They'll lead themselves. The vote happened quickly, stay and fight or evacuate, and hope the Kryn let them leave peacefully. Daniel wasn't surprised when staying won by a landslide. Frontier colonists were, by definition, people who'd looked at safe options and chosen danger instead. Training started immediately. Naomi transformed the mining bay into an improvised combat arena, her movements sharp and precise despite the hour. She demonstrated techniques that looked like dance until Daniel realized each motion was designed to disable or kill with maximum efficiency. Your people really do remember being warriors, he muttered, watching her disarm Maria with a move that involved 3 impossible joint angles and perfect timing. We remember, Naomi agreed, breathing hard but grinning fiercely. We just pretend we don't because warriors are inefficient compared to diplomats and scientists. But the knowledge is still there, buried in cultural memory and old training programs nobody thought to delete. She worked them mercilessly. Daniel had thought his mining shifts were exhausting, but they had nothing on Naomi's drilling. She taught them to move in low gravity like it was an advantage rather than an obstacle, to use mining tools as weapons, to think 3 moves ahead like everything was a puzzle with violent solutions. The Kryn rely on heavy armor and overwhelming firepower, she explained during a brief water break. They're not expecting coordinated resistance from civilians. That's our advantage. They'll underestimate us right up until we collapse their first wave. And if we don't collapse their first wave, someone asked. Then we improvise, Naomi said cheerfully. I'm told humans are excellent at improvisation. Who told you that? Daniel asked. You. Approximately 50 times in the past 6 months whenever anything broke, and you had to fix it with improvised solutions and creative swearing. That's different from combat. Is it though? Naomi tilted her head. ears perking up in that way that meant she was genuinely curious. Both involved limited resources, immediate problems, and consequences for failure. The main difference is that in combat, the equipment actively tries to kill you back. That's not reassuring, Maria said. It wasn't meant to be, Naomi replied. Reassurance is for people who have good options. We have terrible options and 72 hours to make them slightly less terrible. Now get back in formation. We're running that drill again until you can execute it in your sleep. The Kryn arrived exactly on schedule, which Daniel supposed was admirably punctual for an invading force. Their dropships descended through Kepler 442b's atmosphere with the kind of precision that suggested they'd done this many times before, expecting nothing more complicated than frightened civilians and token resistance. What they got instead was Naomi. She moved through their forward positions like something out of the old Chilean war epics, the ones her people had archived and then politely forgotten because they celebrated violence over efficiency. Daniel watched from his position behind a converted ore processor, saw her disable 3 armored soldiers before they'd even registered her presence. The plasma rifle she'd borrowed from the colony's emergency stores sang in her hands, each shot perfectly placed. She's terrifying, Maria whispered beside him, sounding equal parts awed and concerned. She's effective, Daniel corrected, then squeezed off covering fire as another Kryn squad tried to flank their position. There's a difference. The battle lasted 3 days, which was approximately 2 days and 23 hours longer than the Kryn had planned for. Naomi was everywhere at once, collapsing an artillery position here, reorganizing their defensive line there, somehow finding time to drag wounded colonists to safety while simultaneously coordinating ambush tactics through the comm network. Daniel fought beside her when their positions aligned, watching his quiet wife transform into something legendary. She saved his life twice on the second day, once by shooting a Kryn soldier who'd gotten behind him, once by physically tackling him out of the way of an orbital strike that turned their previous position into molten glass. "You're welcome," she said breathlessly, hauling him to his feet with strength that shouldn't have existed 6 months ago. "I had that under control," Daniel lied. "You were about to become a very small crater. A dignified crater, though." She laughed, actually laughed, while plasma fire scorched the air around them. "Still defective," she said, and kissed him hard before sprinting toward the next crisis. The Kryn retreat happened on the 3rd day, after Naomi had personally dismantled their command structure's entire security detail while rescuing a group of captured miners. The tactical feeds showed her moving through the Kryn flagship like a force of nature, too fast for their sensors to track properly. Every movement economical and devastating. When the warships finally withdrew, citing unexpected resistance requiring strategic reassessment, the entire colony watched them go in exhausted silence. Then someone started cheering, and suddenly everyone was cheering, and Daniel found himself swept up in a celebration that involved a lot of hugging and quite possibly some crying. He found Naomi sitting on a pile of rubble that used to be the eastern defensive wall, staring at the stars where the Kryn ships had vanished. She looked utterly spent, her hands shaking badly enough that she'd braced them against her knees. "Hey," Daniel said, settling beside her. "You good?" "I just fought off an invasion force using mining colonists and improvised tactics," Naomi said. "I'm either very good or having a psychotic break. Possibly both." "I'm voting for very good." She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat like that for a while, watching Kepler 442b's sun begin its long climb toward another day. Around them, colonists were already beginning cleanup and repair, that particular frontier resilience that treated near annihilation as just another Tuesday. "They're going to want me to do it again," Naomi said quietly. "Word's already spreading. The Colonial Defense Force will come asking for my expertise. Military contractors will offer ridiculous amounts of money. My people—" She stopped, her jaw tightening. "My people will suddenly remember I exist." "And what do you want?" "I want to stay here," she said immediately. "With you. With these people who saw value in a defective alien woman before she could prove she was useful." "You were always useful," Daniel protested. "I was always present," Naomi corrected. "There's a difference. But you treated me like I mattered before I could fight, before I could defend anything. when I was just me, broken and useless and taking up space in your quarters. Our quarters, Daniel said, and you were never useless, just underestimated. A transport ship was landing in the distance, colonial defense markings visible even from here. Naomi watched it with resignation. They're going to want debriefings, analysis. They'll want to know how a civilian colony held off the Kryn Imperium. You going to tell them? I'm going to tell them that desperate people with something to protect are more dangerous than trained soldiers following orders, Naomi said, and that sometimes the solution to impossible problems is finding someone everyone else gave up on and asking if they'd like to prove the galaxy wrong. The transport was definitely heading their way. Daniel stood, offering Naomi his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. 6 months ago, she would have needed his support to stay standing. Now she stood on her own, steady despite the exhaustion and tremors. How long do you think before they ask you to train elite military units? Daniel asked. Probably before lunch, Naomi said. But I'm going to make them wait until after dinner. I have plans. Plans? I'm going to take a very long shower, eat something that doesn't taste like construction materials, and sleep for approximately 16 hours. Then I'm going to wake up in our terrible quarters on this terrible planet and remember that I chose to be here. Sounds good, Daniel said. Mind if I join you? The sleeping part, I mean. The quarters are still pretty cramped. Naomi smiled, and it was the smile that had taken him months to earn. Genuine, unguarded, completely hers. I think we can make it work. We've managed so far. Still defective, though, Daniel pointed out. Still defective, she agreed, and they walked back toward their home together, leaving the Colonial Defense Force to wait and the galaxy to figure out what to do with a warrior who'd been gift-wrapped as a liability and had proven to be their greatest asset instead. Years later, when historians compiled records of the Kryn conflict and how a forgotten mining colony became the turning point in galactic politics, they would focus on tactics and strategy, on the technical specifications of improvised weaponry, and the psychological impact of unexpected resistance. They would catalog Naomi's rise from discarded liability to legendary warrior with charts and timelines, reducing her transformation into data points and case studies. But they would miss the truth that mattered most. They would miss the quiet morning when Daniel found Naomi standing at their viewport, watching new colonists arrive, families fleeing conflicts, refugees seeking fresh starts, people the galaxy had labeled as inconvenient or broken or simply unwanted. They would miss how she smiled and said, "We should make sure they know they're home now," because she remembered what it felt like to be treated as worthless until someone decided to see her differently. They would miss the moment years after the war when a young Kalayan arrived at their door, ears drooping with the same defeated posture Naomi once carried, sent away by a family who decided he wasn't worth the investment. They would miss how Naomi knelt down to his level and said, "You're not broken, you're just in the wrong gravity," and how those words changed everything for him, the way similar words had once changed everything for her. And they would certainly miss the night Daniel asked her if she ever regretted it. The arranged marriage, the abandoned colony, the life that was supposed to be a quiet ending, but became a legendary beginning instead. Every day, Naomi had answered, watching stars wheel overhead through their viewport, and let him panic for exactly 3 seconds before grinning. "I regret that I didn't meet you sooner, that I wasted years believing what they told me about who I was supposed to be instead of discovering who I actually was." Because that was the real story, wasn't it? Not about warriors or battles or political upheaval, but about what happens when someone refuses to accept the limitations others place on you. When someone sees potential where everyone else saw problems. When you're given permission, or give yourself permission, to be more than the role assigned to you by people who never bothered to look close enough to see what you could become. The galaxy would remember Naomi as the Ghost Blade, the warrior who emerged from nowhere to reshape conflicts and train generations of defenders. But Daniel would always remember her as the woman who arrived barely able to stand and chose to keep standing anyway, who transformed weakness into strength, not by denying who she was, but by finding an environment where who she was could finally flourish. Some people are born in the wrong gravity, carrying potential that their circumstances crush before it can develop. And sometimes all it takes is one person who believes that different isn't the same as defective. that the answer isn't fixing what's broken, but changing the conditions that made it seem broken in the first place. What limitations